friend
Good
here,
morning.
Virus.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us the honor to speak to you again. And again, once more here, Imran, with my colleague, Feroz Abdul Hamid. We just have a few questions we'd like to ask you. I think we last spoke in 2018, just days before you announced your full cabinet lineup during your last term as Prime Minister of Malaysia. And I remember there was a lot of optimism in the air at the time, but much has happened since. And now, more so than ever, the future for Malaysia remains blurry, especially politically. Many citizens, I feel, are unsure of what the future awaits. I know you've been interviewed by quite a lot of foreign media since in the last few months, but we would like to focus on some key areas of governance, politics, and the future of Malaysia. So Feroz and I will just take turns to ask a couple of questions each. And thank you very much for your time. I'll pass it on to Feroz for the first couple of questions. And Feroz, away you go.
Good morning. I'm Feroz Abdul Hamid. Thanks for the privilege. On the 24th of February, you took not just Malaysia by surprise, the world by surprise by resigning as the 7th Prime Minister of Malaysia. Since you've explained your decision on why you resigned, but the question I have is, did you not consider discussing that decision to resign with your other partners in Pakatan Harapan, and why didn't you do that? And why did you decide to unilaterally make that decision, as they too were elected by the people of Malaysia to deliver the mandate?
Yeah, I was very disturbed at that time, and I did not consult anybody. But then that is usual with me. When I want to resign, I don't tell people because they may persuade me to do otherwise. So when I felt that my own party rejected me, I had no choice but to accept that they have lost confidence in me. On the other hand, if I were to go along with the party, I would have to go against the coalition which helped me become the Prime Minister. And that I thought was not something that honorable to do. So I couldn't accept carrying on with my own party. On the other hand, if I were to leave, then I may be accused of not supporting the stand taken by my own party, which is rather racist. They thought of a government that is not a multiracial government, but a Malay government. So I was torn between this need for me to follow the decision of my own party and this desertion of the colleagues who helped me become Prime Minister. So I thought at that stage I should resign. Although I resigned, normally when the Prime Minister resigns, then the matter goes back to Parliament for Parliament to name a successor or maybe name me again. If Parliament gives me a majority vote, then I can tell my party, look, the Parliament has supported me, therefore I may come back. So that was my planning, not actually planning. That was what I had in mind at that stage. Unfortunately, instead of going back to Parliament, the King decided that all the members of Parliament should make a declaration as to who they support, not in Parliament, but outside in the presence of the King. I had expected the coalition, my coalition, which recognized me as their leader. I thought that the coalition would name me as the choice for Prime Minister. But for some reason, they chose another person. This is Datuk Sri Anwar, who aspires to be the Prime Minister. He had apparently convinced them that he had the majority, that the Parliament would give him the majority support, and therefore he could become the Prime Minister. So this coalition of mine, the Pakatan Harapan, decided to name him. But the end result is that he did not get the majority, and I also could not get the majority. Had I gotten the majority, the support of my coalition, I would have a clear win. I would have about 150 out of 222 seats in Parliament. So, well, things did not work out the way I thought it should work out, and therefore I had no choice but to resign.
So, thanks for that. But just going back to Parliament as well now, ultimately, in a democracy, it's a numbers game. The party with the most numbers get to govern, and the member of Parliament with the most, with the confidence and support of the majority of the House gets to be the Prime Minister. So where is the opposition now in regards to coming back to taking the mandate back from the current government? Are you actually collating numbers now to regain power, or are you actually conceding that you are not going to get the numbers, and so let's just prepare for a snap election? Where are we currently on this?
Under normal circumstances, I believe that we should be able to have sufficient numbers for us to come back and become the government again. But unfortunately, when the new Prime Minister was chosen, and he enticed a lot of my own supporters from my own party to join him, and also a lot of other people were brought in by him by giving them a lot of lucrative posts. And now I find that I have lost many of my own supporters. At this moment, I am not sure I can have a majority. But the government also is not sure they can have a majority. So things are hanging, because if at all they have a majority, it would be only a few members, maybe one or two, very wafer thin sort of majority, and that is not good for the government.
I see. And would you be resigned to a snap election? Are you resigned to that now?
Well, I'll be quite old by then. I would be on the sideline, perhaps helping others to my own parties to contest, and hopefully we might be able to gain some seats. But my own party is now split into two. One part is with the government, the other party is with me. So they are trying their best to make sure that I cannot contest under the party's name. So we are faced with the possibility of having to contest under a different name, maybe a new party. So the position at this moment is very uncertain. We want to know whether we can have enough support to contest, because obviously our own party, both the one in the government as well as outside the government, we have lost the support of our previous coalition. We are not getting the support of the UMNO and all that, the new coalition. So the performance will be very bad for the party.
I see. Just going on that, there seems to be a lot of skepticism now in Malaysia about generally party hopping. There's been reports to show that people are now concerned that they may not even choose to vote in the upcoming elections. So especially the young people, there seems to be some sort of disillusionment. How would you address both the skepticism and get them to vote for during the forthcoming elections?
I think everywhere people are allowed to move from one party to another. If they feel dissatisfied with their own party, they may want to switch to another party. That I think is quite normal. But what happened this time is a plot to bring down the government by moving a whole party out of the coalition. The whole party. This is a plot to bring down the government, not just one person moving over to another party, but a whole chunk of people belonging to my party decided to move over, bring down the government, and then form a government with the party which had lost. This is something that intolerable. I think it is a very bad thing for the people had elected them, believing in what they say, and now they are doing just the opposite of what they say. They said that they are fighting to bring down this kleptocratic government, and now they are going to join the kleptocrats. And I think this is reneging on your promises to the people, which makes me unable to go along with them. I cannot do that kind of.
I see. Just speaking of that, there was a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister, as well as a motion of removal of the Parliament Speaker on just 13th of July. What are your views on the bid to remove the Speaker, replacing Speaker Arif with the Election Commission Chair, who PH elected, Azhar Harun? What happens to the Election Commission now and the reforms it was undertaking under PH?
Well, this new Prime Minister appears to want to remove everybody who's in his way. Anybody at all who's not supportive of him would be removed. You know, heads of government companies and all that have been removed. Heads of institutions have been removed. But in the case of the Speaker, this Speaker, of course, wants to be neutral. He was a previous judge, and when drawing up the agenda for the meeting, he had included my proposal to move a motion of non-confidence. He included that in the agenda for the first sitting of Parliament in May. And I think this must have annoyed the Prime Minister, that he should not have put that that in the agenda. And I think because of that, he wants to change the speaker. But the speaker is a very, as far as I can see, he's very neutral. He didn't support us either. He didn't support me when I resigned. He said that it is proper that they should have an replacement for me. But on the other hand, I have a right as a member of parliament to move a motion of non-confidence, and he included that. I think that is the reason why the Prime Minister wants to remove him and put in somebody who's more compliant.
I see.
Just on the point of compliance, when Imran and I interviewed you in 2018, in July, much of the interview we focused on GLC reforms. And you won, Pakatan Harapan won, on the ticket of governance, on reforming. And are you, Tun, satisfied with the speed at which Pakatan Harapan went on reformation of GLCs? Because today we are seeing not just politicians being placed everywhere, but also professionals displacing professionals. And when we spoke in 2018, you mentioned the need for proper tracking of achievements, proper selection process, and also proper tracking of those selected even. So what went wrong in the process of the 22 months? Why weren't these instituted, in your view?
Well, I carried out what we promised, what the coalition promised, that we have to replace the heads of government companies and institutions by professionals, because the previous government had used these posts, these jobs, as an inducement for them to support the government. These were government supporters, and they were politicians, and they had very poor knowledge about management, and there has been corruption, etc. So when we were in the opposition, we thought that we had to do away with this, replace the political appointees with professional people with the skill and the knowledge to run these companies or these institutions. And that was what we did. We replaced about almost 30 of them were moved out, politicians, and replaced with professional people as managers, as chairman, etc. But apparently these people were not supportive of the, well, I think the new prime minister feels that they were not chosen by him. That is one thing. The other thing is that he wants to make use of this post to award people who support him, or to make people support him by giving them this post. So he began to give back, take away, sack the professionals, and when the post is empty, he used politicians who supported him to head these institutions and companies. And some of these people were actually facing charges of corruption. There was one case where a person who was corrupt and was moved out is now brought into the company. It will obviously be difficult for the company to take action on the corruption case. That kind of thing is happening, and that makes people very unhappy. So I think this is the wrong kind of message that you are sending out, that your government is more interested in getting support rather than in clearing up or cleaning up the whole institution.
Yeah.
If I may just very quickly ask, just as a follow-on, just as to the points that you've just made. GIACC, the National Center for Governance, Integrity, and Anti-Corruption, was set up to institute some of these reforms. Had they put in place processes and systems, do you think whoever the Prime Minister was today would be able to just indiscriminately place people everywhere? So did the system not institutionalize when it could have?
Yeah. Well, the habit of pleasing the Prime Minister is very common in Malaysia. This thing is, I wanted to clean up the government. I wanted to have the anti-corruption people powerful enough to even look at my own supporters. But obviously, he creates a lot of discomfort among a lot of people. And then when I'm no longer there, the institute, the setup is still there. The GIACC is still there, but it seems to be very quiet now. Doesn't do much. But there are certain cases of corruption which is not political in nature. That I think they have done something. But when it is political, they become very active. For example, if they have a case against a previous government, my government, which was dealt with already, they dig it up again, and they want to show that, oh, the previous government, my government was corrupt, and they apply pressure by asking people to come for questioning, sometimes for hours and all that. This is a way of making people uncomfortable and less willing to expose themselves or to give evidence, etc. So the anti-corruption campaign that we started when we took over, we set up different agencies, and we have a man who is dedicated to eradicating corruption. He's now very quiet. Apparently, his work is not much appreciated.
I see. So how can the public service of Malaysia become apolitical? So what did PH do to make the public service apolitical when you were in power? And do you think now that's starting to be eroded, as you just mentioned there?
Much depends upon the top man, the Prime Minister. Of course, if he wants them to be corrupt, and if he himself is corrupt, then the whole bureaucratic setup also becomes very corrupt. During the time of Najib, for example, because everybody knows he was corrupt, senior civil servants were corrupt. They were making tons of money for themselves. So when we came in, the first thing we did was to remove these people, to clean up the civil service. And we've done quite a good job, I think. The civil servants now know that we will not tolerate any corruption among them. But these younger people who took over, they were quite able to handle the job. But now I think the government is not emphasizing this eradicating corruption in the civil service. At the moment, I have not discovered any very serious cases involving the bureaucrats. But over time, if you see the Prime Minister being tolerant of corruption and maybe also trying to get the help of the civil service to do things which are wrong, then the civil service will become corrupt again.
Malaysia, as you well know, is one of the few countries in the world without Public Services Act. Yeah, and had just on the topic of creating an apolitical civil service, had Malaysia instituted one of those acts, again going back to institutionalization of governance, could that circumvent some of these cultural stuff that you just spoke about, where if the top guy is corrupt, the system is corrupt? So why wasn't a Public Services Act mooted during your time? Because it was spoken about last year, but it got stuck in the system somewhere. Why too?
No, well, I think the Malaysian civil service performed quite well after independence. They were able to handle a much bigger country with a bigger population, more complex work to be done with new challenges and all that. They have done quite well. Normally, the chief secretary would be a very highly respected person and who would want to defend the institution. We believe that there should be a separation of power between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. To a large extent, this was respected until, of course, when Najib came into power. He seems to be the sole power there. He seems to have influence over the civil servants as well as sometimes we suspect over the judiciary as well. So without any laws that govern the performance of the civil service, we have inherited a system, I must say, the British system, which was here during the colonial days, because it was easy for the Malaysians to take over from the British because they were always the understudy. the top man would be British, next man would be Malaysian. So when the British went away, the Malaysians took over and things moved quite well. And we expanded, of course. Now, I try to keep the civil service as small as possible. A lot of things were privatized and civil servants moved into the private sector. And we kept the numbers down to about 1 million. But after I stepped down, there were additional offices created, which increased the size of the civil service to 1.6 million, 1.7 million. And I thought that this was not justified. And then they went away from the normal setup by having extra off-budget organizations, which were given pay scales of the private sector, not following the government pay scale. So all these things has undermined the dedication of the civil servants, and some of them, of course, have become corrupted. I think we can have some laws governing the civil service, but the main thing is in Malaysia, the Prime Minister has a very, well, the influence of the Prime Minister is very great. A lot of people want to please the Prime Minister. Sometimes the Prime Minister doesn't want it to be done, but they think that, oh, this would please the Prime Minister. And you have a lot of wrong things being carried out.
I see. Speaking of that, you mentioned Najib earlier. Everybody you said knew he was corrupt. I remember we spoke at length at the beginning of the end of Najib Razak, and some people say there's already been similarities in what happened at the end of the term with Najib Razak and what's happening now. The Human Rights Watch just said a couple of days ago, since the new government took office, freedom of speech and press have faced renewed threats in Malaysia, that the government needs to stop treating criticism as a crime. And even the Director General of Immigration came out and had a very stern warning to foreigners that you risk eviction and deportation out of the country. What type of message is this new government now sending again to the world with what's happening?
Well, when we were in the opposition, we were very concerned about this. We want press freedom, free speech, etc. So when we took over, the PH government took over, we tried to be more liberal. But of course, there are certain sensitivities in Malaysia, which if we allow complete press freedom, there will be clashes between the different races, because all these racist kind of statements tend to create tension between the different races. So to that extent, we want people who don't try to instigate people on because of differences among the races. But now it would seem that the government is less liberal, less willing to allow even mild criticism of the government. For example, one of these private news agencies were told that they should not show a picture of me because once they made a mistake, they wanted to show a picture of the king, but I was there. So they showed both pictures and they were criticized, or they were warned not to do this again. And any news about me, of course, and what I do, or what the opposition does, would not be reported in the press. Now there is evidence that although there is no real censorship, but they communicate with the local press to say that you cannot do this, you cannot do that. And in one case, a journalist was asked to be moved out because he was writing things not to the liking of the government. So today, although there appear to be no censorship, but actually the censorship is through directing the local press not to publish certain things. But then, of course, we have the alternative media, and that is much more free because it's very difficult to control. So we do get a lot of information through the alternative media. Unfortunately, there is a lot of fake news. People just making use of the media to write nonsense. So this is a problem, I think, which is not affecting only Malaysia. Many countries are affected by fake news.
I see. Okay. And I just want to change tack a little. You often pledged against politics of nepotism, and you were firm in not allowing your children into politics. Your son Macris was only involved in state level politics when you were the Prime Minister. Do you foresee any of your other children now getting involved in politics? Like, for example, would your oldest son, Mozani, be active in federal government as sons of previous Prime Ministers in Malaysia have?
When I was Prime Minister, Macris was not involved in politics. He did not take any part in politics, and he worked with some NGOs and all that. And Mozani, his son, he was not directly involved, but because the youth section of the government party wanted somebody to handle the finances, and he being in the private sector, he seems to understand this much better. So he was appointed to be the treasurer of the UMNO youth, but none of my relatives have been allowed to participate in politics. My children certainly don't even do business in the country. They do business outside the country. But when I stepped down, I thought that it is not fair to them that to preserve my image, they should be deprived of their wishes to go into politics. So Macris went into politics only after I stepped down. During the time when I was the Prime Minister, none of my children participated in politics. There was a cousin who became a chief minister of one of the states. When the people accused him of corruption, I immediately got rid of him. So I have been so strict to the point that one of my nephews is not on talking terms with me, and wrote a book about me, which is not very flattering. So I'm very strict about that. But when you do something like that, it's not really appreciated.
And I'm sure you will be in time for the years that, and everyone who served the country. Takes a lot to give yourself to the country at all levels. But Tin, we've spoken today about your decision to resign, and then the issues with your coalition, problems that we are having in the parliament, and then GLCs. Can we look at regulatory bodies and oversight and their independence? Do you feel, what are your views of this? I know when you took office, when PH took office, you changed some of the top positions. However, do you feel institutions like Bank Negara, SC, MACC, Bursa, and the likes are independent institutions, or do they play to the politics of the day and are selective in the cases that they choose? What are your views on that, and how do you make them independent?
It depends much upon the character of the people that we appoint. For example, the governor of Bank Negara is very independent. She will not take any directive from the government. She has her own ideas, and even I could not influence her to help out with our loans. We had to pay a huge amount of debt incurred by Najib's government. So the central bank had a huge reserve that can finance 8 months of retail imports. So I don't think that is necessary. So I think what the Bank Negara earns actually belongs to the government. We wanted to use that money to pay off our debts. She's just said no. She has some of the biggest reserve compared to any other central bank. But some others are much more pliable. For example, Petronas, the national oil company, belongs 100% to the government. They are quite independent. They have built up this company to become the only Malaysian company listed in Fortune 500. They perform as good as well as the other oil majors. But recently, I find that they were being forced to do things that they did not like. And when they did not perform as the government tells them to, the head who's been there a long time, a very good man who has done very well, has been removed. So you see different people behaving in different ways, but mostly they are inclined to, obey the government. But some, of course, are very, it's not easy to remove. For example, the governor of the bank, if you remove, you affect the credibility of the government and the finances of the country. So, but with Petronas, a lot of people are very much very disappointed and feel that this removal of the head is not something that should be done. And I think they have lost faith in the ability of Petronas to function on its own. But there are other institutions which are very compliant and some are not so compliant. But if you are not compliant, you run the risk of being removed.
Then, when you took office as the 7th Prime Minister, you set a trend that it's never too old to do anything. So whilst earlier when Imran asked you about your role in the opposition and you said, you are too old and snap elections, you might not be involved. So the question is, would you run again to be the Prime Minister?
No, actually, it's not my wish to become once again the Prime Minister, even for the second time. But when I stepped down in 03, even 2 weeks after, people came to see me to ask me to please do something. Already the new Prime Minister, the 5th Prime Minister, was doing something that the people didn't like. And subsequently, lots of delegation came to see me to ask me to help to do something. So I tried to advise the Prime Minister, but Prime Ministers don't like advice. They want to do things on their own. And eventually, of course, the 5th Prime Minister had to resign because he did very badly in the 8th election on the 2008. He did very badly. He resigned and Najib took over. Now, I thought that I know Najib very well. I thought I would be able to talk with him and to meet him and maybe give some ideas. But again, he was doing things that I felt was wrong, using money. I told him, don't use money. You just go down and meet people, be nice to them, they will support you. But he told me, cash is king. After that, of course, I had to resign from the party. So these are things which are forced upon me. I don't like to come back, to become Prime Minister again. Now they are talking about being for the 3rd time. I don't want to be for the 3rd time. But the thing is that I have quite a good following. And people think that if I am involved, then I can bring along the people who support me. And they keep on, well, almost harassing me, saying that you have to come back. Yeah, I told them I'm old. I'm 94, 95 years old. I can't be doing all these things. They say, as long as you can do something, show your face and say that you are supportive, they will be happy enough. So it's not something I like to do, but I'm forced to do. And I feel an obligation to the people who had supported me all this while. Now that they are in trouble and they ask me for support, I think I need to respond to their request.
I see. And I just have one last question. I know you've spoken again on this in length in the last few months, but with the pandemic as it is currently, and we've seen a second wave in so many countries. I'm currently in the Philippines. We've been under lockdown for quite some time. Cases are steadily rising. Malaysia has had very low numbers, it seems, what's been reported. And more of the numbers have seemed to be in cases from migrant workers almost. But daily it's low, life seems to be opening up again. How do you think you would have handled how the current government handled the crisis? And do you think Malaysian numbers are as low as they seem right now?
Well, one of the most important things that happened in Malaysia was that the politicians left this to the professional. The doctors run this thing. They come up with the ideas about how to deal with this problem. And that was done very early. There was some attempt by some politicians to take over, but there was a lot of resistance to that. So the doctors know what is meant by an epidemic caused by virus. They understand virus, they understand how to handle it. And because of that, they took action very quickly. For example, the lockdown was very early. Before others had a lockdown, we already had a lockdown. And Malaysians, by and large, are very disciplined and very obedient. When the government says don't go out, they stayed at home. So we were able to isolate the people from sources of infection. And we were able to check on movements of people. Movement control ordinance were passed so that people do not move around too much. But that immediately produced results. The numbers became less and less. And now we are allowing people to do certain things, but to do those things according to the standard operation procedure. You have to obey this. For example, you have to keep your social distances, you have to wear your mask, and you have to be checked. And all these things were done in Malaysia. Fortunately, our medical services is quite good. It covers the whole country. All the places have got hospitals, and they are fairly well equipped. And of course, Malaysia is the biggest producer of gloves in the world, and these things are available. Also, the mask. So when we tell people, please wear masks, and they will. You can see pictures. They are all wearing masks, and they keep their distance. And when they work, of course, now as much as possible, they do work at home. All these things were put in place. And the result, as you can see, practically now there is zero new cases. And there has been no death for the past 15 days or so. So the professionals were very good in this, and the government allowed them to have their own way. We don't have situation like in America where Mr. Fauci was saying something, the president will say something else. That doesn't happen here. So I think we have managed this quite well. We certainly have less number of people infected compared even to Singapore and the Philippines. Number of deaths also has been kept at about 120 for several weeks now. So the handling of the COVID-19 is very, very well done, very effectively done in Malaysia. Where you see these things spreading is where people are not disciplined. You know, when this epidemic started, the assumption in the developed countries is that this is some disease of developing countries or poor countries. But what they don't understand is that the poor countries may be more disciplined than the freedom-loving people of the developed countries. They want to go to demonstrate on the streets. They want to have fun. They object to lockdowns and all that. And you see the result. I mean, America is the worst place because the president doesn't believe that they should have a lockdown. He's thinking more about the economy, and the same thing with Brazil. So, but Malaysia is quite different. This COVID-19 is something totally new. We have never experienced this kind of problem before. We had recessions before, but we were able to overcome recession because the market was there. What happens is now, just now, that even if we recover, we can reproduce things, all those things that we export, but the market is not able to absorb what we produce. So what happens to the world now affects us very much. So for us, there is going to be a totally new way of doing business. We have to make use of the communication facilities now, because now communication is very good, and we think we can recover a little bit earlier than other people if we understand the restriction caused by the pandemic. And already Malaysians are making adjustments to that. Today, the business are almost normal again, but people are very careful. They wear masks, and they do obey government instruction. So I think I look forward to a fairly early recovery by comparison to others. I know as a trained doctor, I understand what viral epidemics can do, but I think we understand it very well, and we are willing to make early sacrifices in order to recover quickly.